And the cover-up continues regardless of what the topic is, my friends. So there you have BP hiring private military contractors to keep the crime scene covered up. Again, is this a repeat? Why did New York have a company called Controlled Demolition contracted in mere moments to, of course, destroy the crime scene at Ground Zero after 9/11? But our last note on the oil spill updates from the economiccollapseblog.com, 16 questions about the spill that we deserve answers to. We don't have time to get into all those questions, but again, now week after week after week, we've been giving you all the info that, again, you can dig into, you can sink your teeth into, you can continue to do the research on the spilling, sinkholes, and sickened. Those were our BioWars and envirohealth updates last week. But now again, connections, consensus, and lightning. Let's get into the envirohealth updates. And amazingly, again, stranger than fiction, what goes on in the real world, whether these are psyops and fake events or real events, it's all about the semiotics. It's all about the symbolism. It's all about the stories that play out. And again, paying attention to all of this and doing the data mining puts together an interesting puzzle. But we don't have all the pieces, but every day we're adding more pieces. And again, this has got to be a reciprocal thing, and that's how we'll learn, and that's how we'll keep adding pieces in. But I'm digressing, my friends. From the register.co.uk as well as the Associated Press, lightning smites a 60-foot statue of Jesus in Ohio.
Jesus is on fire. It's amazing. The cross.
As my girlfriend joked, that sounds like that's coming from Goth News. Jesus is on fire. Look at the cross. It's amazing. 5.9 earthquake shakes Southern California. 100-plus minor earthquakes rattle Southern California. But from nationalpost.com, consensus on climate change was phony, says IPCC insider. ClimateGate goes on. EPA takes a giant leap into tyranny. More on that from morphcity.com. U.S. stockpile receives smallpox vaccine. That's, of course, from bioprepwatch.com. And we already heard from Olbermann once, so we're not going to hear him again. But you can hit the link and hear him slam a Tea Party Senate candidate for voting against water fluoridation. As if that's something good for you. And again, just making fun of some of her admittedly stupid positions. But again, it's all about the name calling. It's all about the fake left-right paradigm. Johnson & Johnson expands recall of over-the-counter medicines. More on that from Huffington Post. AstraZeneca denied drugs link to diabetes for years after admitting link to Japanese physicians. More on that from naturalnews.com. And again, AstraZeneca connects to the aforementioned pharma whores from Dr. Leonard Horowitz. Biodetection Technologies Conference kicks off in Arlington, Virginia. Of course, more on that from BioPrepWatch, and that's just another conference going on where the public and private connections are being made, and that's where the lobbying and the threataganda comes from in the private sector, the private military contractors saying, you're not prepared for this, you're not prepared for cyberspace war, you're not prepared for an I-911. Let us get you prepared. And it's the revolving door, and sometimes white hats turn into black hats, and sometimes blue team turns into red team. Our last note on this in BioWars EnviroHealth updates, connections, consensus, and lightning. From dailyfreshnews.info, Albert Pike Camp flooded in Arkansas. I believe we briefly mentioned the floods in Arkansas last week. Unfortunately, there are 16 dead in this case. But again, in watching, as Lauren Coleman would call it, the twilight language, as we are calling it, the signs and the symbols and the memes, Albert Pike Camp flooded. Albert Pike If you don't know your morals and dogma, you need to do the research. But the BioWars EnviroHealth updates, again, segues nicely into our next story. And hopefully, all of these stories segue well, and we try and put it together for you. And again, I think we put together a pretty good operation here at MediaMonarchy.com, putting together news and information, public source, open source, all of it together. U.S. identifies vast riches of minerals in Afghanistan. We went over this on the latest New World Next Week with CorbettReport.com, and we do have more updates, and we are going to get into it a little bit more here, but let's take it straight from the New York Times. The United States has discovered nearly $1 trillion in untapped mineral deposits in Afghanistan, far beyond any previously known reserves, and enough to fundamentally alter the Afghan economy and perhaps the Afghan war itself, according to senior American government officials. The previously unknown deposits, including huge veins of iron, copper, cobalt, gold, and critical industrial metals like lithium, are so big and include so many minerals that are essential to modern industry that Afghanistan could eventually be transformed into one of the most important mining centers in the world. An internal Pentagon memo, for example, states that Afghanistan could become the Saudi Arabia of lithium, a key raw material in the manufacture of batteries for laptops and BlackBerries. And we'll, of course, put in the mention of just the Foxconn mass amounts of suicides going on at those plants in China creating our laptops and BlackBerries. But some of the updates that we have all linked up for you, we've got them from all around the world: Telegraph, The Guardian, Politico.com, but from allgov.com, surprise, surprise, as Afghan war loses support, U.S. discovers huge mineral deposits. And even Danger Room notes, no, the U.S. didn't just discover $1 trillion Afghan motherlode. As Steve Watson notes, Afghanistan mineral riches story is war propaganda. Raw Story notes, Pentagon report in April only briefly mentioned the $1 trillion in Afghan wealth. Global Post asks if the New York Times, if the old gray lady got played on this Afghanistan mineral story, but in a way that seemingly no one else can. And again, I don't play the game of, who's my favorite radio host, who's my leader. I'm a one-man band. I get the information where I think good, reliable, informational, actionable kind of information is available from, and we like folks like Webster Tarpley for that, for the historical angle, short-range and long-range look that he gives, and that's what he gives in this latest clip from Russia Today. Again, he's a frequent contributor on Russia Today. Afghan minerals, uncovered conspiracy, Tarpley on the Afghan mineral wealth, of course, designed to prolong the occupation.
In 2007, apparently more reports were published. They say it sort of collected dust. They sat on this for a few years. So talk about the timing here. I mean, why did this article come out now?
Well, as you correctly say, there's nothing new here. They have discovered nothing. The discoveries, if there were some, were made by the Soviets during the 1980s. There's a World Bank report from 2004 that has all of this stuff. At the time of Karzai coming here to Washington about a month ago with Hillary Clinton meeting, there was a bunch of talk about the mineral wealth of Afghanistan. So it's a very important thing, but it's not new. So the question is, what are we dealing with here? This is a planted story in the New York Times by James Risen, who has chosen to become the stenographer of people in the Pentagon.
Well, why would he do that? I mean, what is in it for the New York Times? I mean, I've heard people say this, but what does the New York Times have anything to do with this? I mean, again, what's in it for them?
The New York Times is, let's say, politically available for all kinds of projects. Now, in this case, why don't we look at the article? Who is the only top U.S. official mentioned in the article? It's General David Petraeus, the commander of the CENTCOM, the Central Command. Now, people in Washington know that he is an active candidate for president. He is being groomed by the neocon faction of the Republican Party.